run you through a little bit of what I did, and it may lay out the groundwork for why I ended up where I'm at. But I did a BA with an honors in psych, so that was my first foray into university life. I wanted to actually do hairdressing, and my father told me he would pay for my first year of university if I would just try it for 1 year, because he said I have so little staying power that there's no way I could be a hairdresser, because you have to do that forever. You don't have a lot of flexibility, and that wouldn't work for me. So I did my arts degree and actually found out that I loved it. But my favorite part of it was statistics, so I did some TA with a person that taught the statistics course in that particular program. Worked a little bit at mental health, and I loved the mental health clinic. I thought that's what I wanted to do. But decided I wasn't really ready to go back to school right away, so I took a job as the manager of our research lab, and in the process I applied to a school called the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, because I come from a criminal justice background, so some lawyers, and my dad was a cop, so I liked that kind of thing. So I got accepted to a Master's of Forensic Psych degree in mafia relations, and that was what I decided I was going to do. But that summer, who here is from New Brunswick? Anybody? A couple of people. Well, at that particular time, may have preceded you, there was a person called Noel Winters, and he killed a bunch of people, chopped them up, put them in garbage bags, and floated them in one of our local beaches. And he happened to be at the mental institution when I was there during the summer, and I decided that that too would have a very short lifespan of a job. I thought you'd get burned out pretty quick. So I decided that probably really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I stayed in my job managing our research lab. And at that time I ran into somebody in our business faculty who was doing some work with our local mental institution. It was called the Provincial Hospital at the time. And he knew nothing about those kinds of institutions, but what he was doing was a study on a new naming. They wanted to rebrand this hospital. I knew nothing about marketing and branding, although my mom did a lot of market research. I had no idea. But this fellow really knew nothing about the mental health side of things, and he showed up to do a focus group with nurses at our local institution with a box of Tim Hortons donuts. And he came in through our back door, and I was working that afternoon, and he came in through our common area where some of our patients watched television, but they were sugar restricted. And so when they saw the donuts, they attacked him. It was quite hilarious, actually. Stole his donuts and left him quite shaken, and he quit. And so I ran into him a few days later, and he asked me if I would do some of the research for him with some of the nursing groups, and I said sure. And while I was there, I decided I really liked it. And I guess so the point of this, and a couple of the other stories I'm going to tell you before we get to the crux of this talk, is that that was my first set of connections of people who were doing things that were a little bit different than me. And it was a way for me to see into the business side without really getting into it. So I decided to do that job for him, and in the process I met a friend of his who actually was a prof in Fredericton, who was doing some work for a local radio station that was trying to start, and I did a job for him. And when I was finished, he asked if I was interested in doing an MBA here, that he had some research assistant money, and I could have it if I wanted to come. And I thought, yeah, you know, maybe I would do that. So are you getting the impression? Not a lot of sticking power. My father knew me better than I knew myself. So I came to Fredericton. I did a master's in business with a major in marketing. But I still drew a lot on my undergraduate degree. And the one thing that I can say about my arts background is that it taught me to write well. And that saved me through the rest of my degree program, and it's one of the things that was one of my most valued skill sets when I went into government. The ability to do research, analytical work, and to write well is a hot commodity if you're thinking about government. So I finished my MBA. I did a thesis, so I took the research option because I didn't want to take all the courses, and I thought, well, this will be a good way to shorten it up a little bit. And I started a consulting firm with somebody I met in Fredericton. We had a few really good lucrative contracts. Then we landed a big one, did all the work, and then the company went bankrupt and didn't pay us, and we wound up in a big lawsuit. And I decided that that wasn't really what I wanted to do either. And at the time, UNB St. John had a term contract for teaching, and I thought, you know what? I think that's what I'll do. I'll go there, teach for a year until I figure out exactly what I want to do. And I decided I really liked it. And at that time, I had marketing instructors were really hard to come by. And so UNB St. John had a program that if you signed a contract to stay for 2 years to every 1 year they supported, they would actually pay for you to go and do your PhD. And so I thought, well, no risk there, so I did. So I went to Oklahoma to do a PhD. I did it in marketing, and I did a quantitative methods and intercultural communications minor. And I have to say, people always say, why'd you go to Oklahoma? Very scientific. I took the phone book. At the time, our phone book had a map. And I drew a line across the map of the United States where I thought there was a line of cold versus warm. That was the start. And then I just waited to see where the most money was. And once I figured that out, then I just picked the place that had somebody who was the most interesting to work with. And one of the things that I was looking for was a business program that would let me also use some of the skill sets and some of the knowledge I had from my arts degree. And Oklahoma was a good match for that. So since graduation, I started back at UNB St. John, obviously. I had some contractual obligations there. I went back. And while I was doing my teaching, I started to do a little bit of professional development work for some of our local community agencies, including municipal governments. And so that was my first taste of quasi-government work. A couple of our towns were going through strategic plans, and so they wanted some work. I went and did some work for them. And through that, I met a lot of people who were involved in community organizations, in particular economic development. And so through those links, I started to do a little bit of work with Enterprise St. John, which is our local economic development agency. And from there, mental health and a couple of other things that were of interest to me. I stayed at the university for about 2.5 years before I went to one of our research centers, the Electronic Commerce Research Center. And part of the attraction there was they had a board, and the board of directors were government, made up of government and private sector partners, a lot of whom I had met during my couple of years of teaching when I was doing my community work. And through that particular experience, I met a lot of other government people, got a little bit of exposure to government programs, got a lot of exposure to frustration of trying to run a research center, trying to get research funding, trying to get government agencies to understand what we were doing and actually fund them. So I'm sure all of you have had the experience where one government granting agency says, well, we don't fund operations, but we will give you money for project work. Well, it's pretty hard to do those project work pieces when you don't have the infrastructure behind you to do it. Or they'll buy you equipment, but they won't pay for any of the travel. So I experienced that frustration, and I'm going to come back to that because I would approach it a lot differently today than I did then. I was at the EC Center for about 4.5 years, and then I went back to the Faculty of Business as the dean, first acting, and then as the permanent dean. And there I took a much more external role, and that's what attracted me to that particular job, was that I was interested in more of the relationship development than I was the internal curriculum development, faculty management side of things. So I did a lot of development work, a lot of donor relation work, and during my first 4 years there, we built up scholarships, built up a lot of government linkages of programs. So I'll tell you a little story between the EC Center and the Faculty of Business. When I was at the EC Center, the first year I was there, we developed this program, and it was a training program for small and medium-sized businesses to get their websites up. And we presented it to a COA, It was tentatively accepted. We waited 8 months. We didn't get the money. We went back to find out what was going on. Well, there were a few glitches. We needed to redo the proposal. We redid that proposal 9 times. And at the submission of the 9th one, they rejected it. So when I moved back to the Faculty of Business, the person who took over for me started to resubmit those proposals. And I would say 3.5 years into my dean's position, ACOA came and met with me as dean to say, we'd like to look at your electronic commerce people to develop a program that accomplishes these 5 objectives, which were the 5 objectives that were in our original proposal when I first started at the EC Center. And so I have to say that now for 6 years that program has been up and running and is fully funded and continuously funded every year. But that is how government works, has been my experience. So my second experience with a very similar activity is that when I took over as Dean of the Faculty of Business, we had applied for some funding for a program in energy studies. And sometimes your ideas for programming are actually going to come from government and vice versa. So what year would that? 2000, I guess. In the year 2000, we proposed an idea for a Center of Excellence in Energy Studies. At that time, there was a lot of talk in New Brunswick around energy and the development of the energy hub and what that would mean for New Brunswick. St. John had done a growth strategy document, and I was part of that. It was a community-led initiative to identify 5 sectors in St. John and the greater St. John area that would be the growth sectors for the province for the next 10 years. Energy was one of them. And so from a dean's perspective, that's a great opportunity to look across the university to say, okay, science, arts, and business can get in on this. We should look to see what we can do from a programming and R&D perspective. We put the proposal in, and again and again and again. The private sector put it in, the university put it in, but there was no funding. And just on Monday of this week, we presented it to the Atlantic Center for Energy, which is a private sector board that's based in St. John, but it's actually a North American-based board. And I'm happy to say that we will be launching a certificate in energy studies in October of this year, which will be funded fully by the provincial government. But it takes time. And those time frames are the same if you're looking for work. You can come across the same kind of thing, because until they realize the value in the idea and come back, sometimes there's that lag time.